I still remember the taste of the rain that October morning in Naperville, Illinois. It tasted like metal and desperation, like something old and forgotten had crawled up from the bottom of the sky just to remind me that I did not belong anywhere anymore. I was 18 years old, and I was standing on the limestone porch of the only home I had ever known, holding a black garbage bag in one hand and my little brother Micah in the other. Micah was 15. He was wheezing. His inhaler was almost empty, and his lips were starting to turn that pale bluish color I had come to fear more than anything else in this world. Behind us, the mahogany front door closed with a sound I will never forget as long as I live. It was not a slam. It was worse than a slam. It was a quiet, deliberate click. The click of a deadbolt sliding into place. The click of a woman who had waited 5 years to lock me out of my father's house. Her name was Delphine Ashcroft. She had been my stepmother for 4 of those years. And through the beveled glass of that front door, I could see her standing in the foyer, wrapped in a cream-colored cashmere robe that cost more than the used Honda Civic parked at the end of the driveway. She was smiling, not a big smile, just a small, satisfied curve of her painted lips, like a cat who had finally caught the mouse she had been stalking for years. Her son Preston stood behind her, 22 years old, just graduated from Northwestern University on my father's dime. He was eating an apple, watching us the way a man watches a movie he already knows the ending to. "You are 18 now," Caleb Delphine had told me 30 minutes earlier, her voice as smooth and cold as the marble under my bare feet. "Legally an adult. The estate belongs to me now. Your father is gone. Your free ride is over." I had tried to argue. I had tried to remind her that Micah was still 15, still a minor, still needed his medication, still needed a home. But she had already been ready for that. She had pulled out a folder of legal papers, waved them in my face, and told me that as Micah's legal guardian, she had arranged for him to be placed in a state youth facility upstate, a place where sick boys like him could be, and I remember the word she used, managed. I looked at my little brother's face when she said it, and in that moment, I made the only decision I had ever really made in my whole life. I grabbed him. I grabbed his backpack. I grabbed my father's old green fishing tackle box from the study because it was the only thing in that house that still smelled like Dad. And I walked out, before she could call security, before she could call the state, before anyone could take my brother away from me. And that is how at 18 years old, with $237 in my pocket, and a 15-year-old asthmatic brother clinging to my side, I became homeless in the richest suburb of Chicago. The rain kept falling. The Honda Civic waited at the curb like an old friend. And behind that mahogany door, my stepmother turned off the porch light, just to make sure I understood. We were not welcome anymore. If you have ever felt what it is like to be turned away by the very people who were supposed to love you the most, I want you to leave a heart in the comments right now. Just a single heart. So I know you are listening, because what I am about to tell you next is the part of the story I have never told anyone, not even Micah. And I need to know I am not alone as I tell it. My father's name was Jonah Ridgway. He was 51 years old when he died. He was an agricultural engineer for a firm downtown, the kind of man who wore flannel shirts under his sport coats and kept dirt under his fingernails, no matter how often he washed his hands. He was not rich, not the way people think of rich. But he had worked hard for 30 years, and he had built a comfortable life, a house in Naperville, a retirement account, 2 boys he loved more than his own breath. My mother's name was Marigold. She died in a car accident on Interstate 88 when I was 6 years old and Micah was 3. I do not remember much about her. I remember she smelled like lavender. I remember she used to sing to us in the kitchen while she made pancakes on Sunday mornings. I remember the day the 2 police officers came to our door, and my father dropped to his knees in the living room and made a sound I had never heard a grown man make before. For 6 years after that, it was just the 3 of us, Dad, me, and Micah. Micah had already been diagnosed with severe asthma by the time he was 4. Every winter was a war. Every cold was a hospital trip. And Dad would sit up all night in the rocking chair next to Micah's bed, holding a nebulizer to my brother's face, while he sang the same old country songs my mother used to sing. His voice was terrible, but it worked. It always worked. And then one summer evening at a real estate expo downtown, my father met Delphine Ashcroft. She was a broker. Tall, elegant, sharp cheekbones, hair the color of polished mahogany. She wore a red dress that night. She told my father she had loved his lecture on farmland preservation. She told him she had lost her own husband 3 years earlier. She told him her son Preston was in college, that she was lonely, that she had never met a man who cared about the earth the way he did. My father was a good man, and good men, I have learned, are the easiest men in the world to fool. She moved in within 8 months. She married him within a year. She smiled at us with those pretty white teeth, and she called us her boys, and she cooked us dinners that were always just a little too salty. And little by little, the way a river carves stone, she began to change our lives. She threw away my mother's photographs. She said she needed the wall space. She replaced the old rocking chair in Micah's room with a modern designer piece she found in a catalog. She told my father his old friends were, and this is the exact words she used, unrefined. She stopped letting his brother visit at Thanksgiving. She stopped letting our old neighbors come over for the 4th of July. And somewhere along the way, without either me or Micah noticing, she pulled my father away from every single person who had ever loved him, including, as I would later learn, his own father, a man named Silas Ridgway, my grandfather, a man I did not even know existed until the night everything changed. But I am getting ahead of myself, because the truth is 6 months before that October morning on the porch, my father died. He was 51 years old. He had a heart murmur, but it had always been managed. He took his medication every morning with orange juice, and he had not missed a single dose in 7 years. And then one Tuesday afternoon in April, he came home from work early, complaining of dizziness. He lay down on the living room couch. He asked Delphine to bring him his pills, and by the time the paramedics arrived, he was gone. The doctors called it a cardiac event. The paperwork was filed, the funeral was held. And 2 weeks later, in the office of a lawyer named Winston Fairbanks, a man I had known since I was a child, a man who had played golf with my father every other Saturday for a decade, the will was read. Everything went to Delphine. The house, the retirement account, the savings, every single dollar my father had ever earned in his entire adult life. Winston read the document aloud in a voice that never once cracked. He did not look at me. He did not look at Micah. He just kept reading page after page until the very last paragraph. To my sons, Caleb and Micah Ridgway, the will stated I leave the sum of $10,000 each to be released upon completion of probate. That was it. That was our inheritance. $10,000 each. From the man who had raised us. From the man who had held my hand at my mother's funeral. From the man who had promised us over and over that no matter what happened, he would always take care of us. And even that $10,000, Delphine informed me that same afternoon, was tied up in probate court. It could take months, maybe years. And she was so sorry, but really, what did we expect? Grief made people do strange things. And clearly at the end, our father had made his choice. I did not cry that day. I do not remember why. I think it was because I did not believe it yet. I think it was because some part of me was still waiting for my father to walk through the door and tell me it was all a mistake. But he did not walk through the door. And 6 months later, on that rainy October morning, neither did anyone else. The first 2 weeks in the Honda Civic were the coldest of my life. We drove to a Walmart parking lot in Aurora, Illinois. I picked it because it had bright lights and a security patrol that came by every 2 hours. I picked it because I did not want anyone to hurt my brother while he slept. We had $237. I bought a case of bottled water, 3 loaves of white bread, a jar of peanut butter, and 2 boxes of Ritz crackers. I bought a can of gasoline. I bought a package of dollar store blankets. And I bought Micah's asthma inhaler, which cost $68 because we no longer had insurance. That first night, Micah cried. He was 15 years old, and he tried so hard not to. He kept turning his face toward the passenger window and wiping his eyes on his sleeve, and he kept saying, "I'm sorry, Caleb. I'm sorry. I'm slowing you down." And I remember reaching across the console and putting my hand on his head the way our father used to do, and telling him the only thing I could think to say: "You are not slowing me down, Micah. You are the reason I am still going." He fell asleep with his head on my shoulder, and I sat there in the driver's seat of that old Honda watching the parking lot lights flicker on the dashboard, and I made myself a promise. I would not let her win. Whoever Delphine Ashcroft was, whatever she had done to my father, whatever she had planned for my brother, I would not let her win. Later that night, around 2 in the morning, Micah sat up in the back seat. His face was pale in the parking lot lights. "Caleb," he whispered, I need to tell you something. What is it, buddy? Do you remember back in April, right before Dad died? There was a phone call, late at night. I got up for water and Dad was in the kitchen. He was crying. He was on the phone with someone. I heard him say a name. Silas. He said, Silas, I am so sorry. I am so sorry. I stared at my brother. My hands went cold. The next morning, Micah said, when I asked Dad who Silas was, he grabbed my shoulders. Hard. Harder than he had ever grabbed me. And he said, Micah, promise me you will never say that name again. Not to anyone. Especially not to Delphine. Promise me. I promised him Caleb, and I never did. I forgot about it. Until tonight. I looked at my little brother in the back seat of that old Honda Civic. Silas. The name my father had wept over on the phone. 2 weeks before he died. Somewhere out there, a man named Silas had been trying to reach my father in the last weeks of his life, and my father had known, and he had cried, and he had made my little brother promise to keep the name a secret. I did not sleep that night, not 1 minute. I got a job at a diner called Millie's 3 blocks from the Walmart. The owner was a woman named Millie Fortenberry. She was 68 years old, wore a hairnet, and had opinions about everything. She took one look at me on that Wednesday morning, standing in her doorway in a wet jacket, and she said, "You look like you have not eaten in a week. Sit down." I told her I did not have money. She told me she did not care. She brought me a plate of eggs and hash browns and a cup of black coffee, and she watched me eat every bite. And when I was done, she asked me if I could wash dishes. I said yes. She said, $9 an hour cash. Start now. That night, I brought Micah a hamburger wrapped in wax paper. He ate it in the Honda Civic with tears rolling down his face. He said it was the best thing he had ever tasted. I worked at Millie's from 6 in the morning until 3 in the afternoon for 5 days. I made $280 in cash. I bought Micah a new inhaler. I bought us peanut butter and jelly and a loaf of good bread from the bakery. I filled up the gas tank. And on the 5th night, sitting in the driver's seat with the dome light on and Micah asleep in the back, I finally opened my father's tackle box. I do not know why I waited so long. I think part of me was afraid. Afraid that opening it would break me. Afraid that his smell would still be in there, and I would fall apart, and I would not be able to put myself back together in time for Micah. But I opened it anyway. The smell hit me first. Lake water, old rubber, the faint, sweet ghost of my father's aftershave. My father used to take us fishing at Fox River when we were little before Delphine, back when Dad still had time for things like that. He kept his lures in this box, his extra line, a little pocket knife with a bone handle. I ran my fingers over the plastic dividers. Tears started rolling down my face, and I did not even try to stop them. I could hear my brother's soft breathing behind me. I could hear the wind pushing against the car. And I could feel my father so strongly it was almost like he was sitting next to me. That is when I pressed down on the bottom tray, and the plastic shifted. I froze. I pressed it again. Something clicked. Something at the bottom of the tackle box gave way. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely lift the tray. I wedged my car key under the edge and pried it upward. And underneath, taped to the bottom of the box, was a folded piece of yellow legal paper, and a small velvet pouch, and a single silver key. I opened the paper first. I saw my father's handwriting, rushed, slanted, almost frantic, as if he had written it in a hurry in the middle of the night, knowing he did not have much time. Caleb, my son, if you are reading this, then the worst has happened, and I am so sorry. I am so sorry I did not tell you the truth in time. Do not trust Winston Fairbanks. Do not trust Delphine. They have been working against me for months. My heart medication has been making me foggy, and I could not fight them the way I should have. But I know what they are doing, and I have prepared for it. There is a bank downtown, First Prairie Bank on Adams Street. Safety Deposit Box 402. Use this key. And Caleb, there is something else I never told you. Something I should have told you years ago. You and Micah have a grandfather, my father. His name is Silas Ridgway. He lives on a farm in Iowa. Delphine convinced me to cut him out of our lives. I was wrong. I was so wrong. Take care of your brother. Look up when it matters. And whatever happens next, know that I love you both more than my own life. Dad. I read that letter 3 times. And when I was done, I set it down on the passenger seat and I pressed my forehead against the steering wheel of that old Honda Civic, and I cried harder than I have ever cried in my entire life. Because he had known. My father had known she was doing something to him, and he had tried to save us anyway. And somewhere out there on a farm in Iowa, there was a man I had never met who was apparently my grandfather. The same man Micah had heard my father crying to on the phone, 2 weeks before the end. The next morning I drove to Chicago. I did not tell Micah where we were going. I told him I had a lead on some money Dad had left us. His eyes lit up in a way that broke my heart because I could see him trying so hard to hope. He put on his cleanest shirt. He combed his hair. He wanted to look presentable, he said, in case the bank people asked. First Prairie Bank was a marble building on Adams Street with brass revolving doors and a ceiling so high it made you feel small just walking in. I told Micah to sit in a chair by the window. I approached the counter. The bank manager was a woman in her 50s with a tight bun and skeptical eyes. She looked at my wet jacket. She looked at my 3-day beard. She asked me for identification. I handed her my driver's license and the silver key. She frowned. She disappeared into a back office for 10 minutes. When she came back, her whole face had changed. She was polite, almost apologetic. She led me through a set of steel doors into a small private viewing room. She placed a long metal box on the mahogany table, and she left me alone. My hands shook so hard I could barely turn the key. Inside the box, there was no money, no cash, no gold. There was only a single manila folder, thick, heavy, sealed with red wax. I opened it. The first document was a property deed, registered to a company called Prairie Wind Holdings, LLC. The property was located at rural Route 7, Cedar Hollow, Iowa. 180 acres. A farmhouse, a barn, a corn silo, and a windmill. The second document was a transfer of ownership. Prairie Wind Holdings, LLC was effective the date of my father's death, transferred entirely to me. Caleb Ridgway, sole proprietor. The third document was a business card. Ruth Kettering, attorney at law. Main Street, Cedar Hollow, Iowa. And at the bottom of the folder, underneath everything else, was an old brass key with a strip of masking tape wrapped around it. On the tape in my father's shaky handwriting were 2 words, front door. I sat in that little viewing room for a long time, staring at those documents, trying to make my brain understand what I was seeing. My father had owned a farm in Iowa. He had hidden it inside a shell company. He had transferred it to me before he died, and he had never once in 18 years of my life mentioned any of it, except through a name my brother had been forbidden to say. I walked out into the lobby. Micah was still sitting in the chair by the window. His face was thin. His hands were folded in his lap. He looked up when I approached, and he asked me the only question that mattered. "Is it good news, Caleb?" I looked at my little brother. I looked at the folder in my hands. I looked at the brass key that had my father's handwriting on it. And for the first time in 6 months, I felt something I had almost forgotten I was capable of feeling. Hope. Micah. I said, "I think we have somewhere to go." We drove out of Chicago at 4 o'clock that afternoon. The gas tank was full. Micah had a new inhaler in his pocket. And on the passenger seat, wrapped in an old flannel shirt I had found in the trunk, was every document I owned in the world. The GPS said the drive would take 5 hours and 42 minutes. Interstate 88 West, then Interstate 80 West across the Mississippi River, then 2-lane highways through the corn country of eastern Iowa, Cedar Hollow. Population 2,840, a dot on the map so small it did not even have its own zip code on Google. The sun set behind us. The cornfields stretched out in every direction, gold and endless in the last of the October light. Micah pressed his face against the passenger window and watched the barns go by. Red barns, white farmhouses, silos catching the last light like church steeples. He turned to me somewhere near Iowa City. His voice was very quiet. "Caleb," he said, "do you think Grandpa knew about us?" I did not know how to answer him. Because I did not know, not yet, but I would find out. Because 200 miles ahead of us, in a small farm town I had never heard of, until that afternoon an old woman named Ruth Kettering was about to open her office door and change everything I thought I knew about my own family. We crossed the Mississippi River at 9:42 that night. I remember the exact time because Micah had fallen asleep with his head against the passenger window, and I glanced at the dashboard clock, just as the bridge light swept across his face. And in that moment, watching my little brother sleep, I understood something I had never understood before. Whatever waited for us in Cedar Hollow, Iowa, I was ready for it, because I had nothing left to lose. The Honda Civic hummed along the empty highway. The cornfields on either side had gone black and mysterious in the dark. Every 10 minutes or so, we would pass a lonely farmhouse with a single yellow light glowing in an upstairs window, and I would think about the families inside. Mothers who were tucking their children in, fathers who were reading the paper, grandparents who were somewhere in the country waiting for grandchildren they had never been allowed to meet. I did not know it yet, but I was one of those grandchildren. We pulled into Cedar Hollow at 11:15 that night. The town was already asleep. Main Street was 3 blocks long, a blinking yellow traffic light, a hardware store, a feed store with a wooden sign that said, Voss Feed and Grain Established 1962, a diner with the lights off, a white Methodist church with a tall steeple that seemed to glow against the black sky. We slept in the car that night, parked in the empty lot behind the church. I did not want to knock on Ruth Kettering's door at midnight, and I did not want to explain to anyone yet why 2 boys from Illinois were driving through town in the middle of the night with everything they owned in the back seat. Micah slept curled up in his blanket. I kept the engine running for the heat just for an hour until he was fully asleep. Then I turned it off to save gas, and I sat in the driver's seat watching the stars come out over the cornfields. There were more stars than I had ever seen in my life. So many stars I could not even find the constellations I knew from books. The sky in Naperville had never looked like this. The sky in Chicago had never looked like this. This was a sky that belonged to a different kind of place, a quieter place, a place where things had been the same for a long, long time. I fell asleep somewhere around 3 in the morning, and I dreamed of my father. He was standing in a cornfield. He was younger, healthy. He was smiling at me the way he used to smile before Delphine came into our lives, and he was pointing to something over my shoulder, something I could not see. His lips were moving, but I could not hear the words, just his eyes, warm, alive, trying to tell me something. I woke up at dawn. The sky was pink, the church steeple was catching the first light, and Micah was awake looking at me with those quiet gray eyes of his. "Caleb," he said, "I dreamed about Dad." "I know, buddy," I said. "Me too." Ruth Kettering's office was on the second floor of the hardware store. There was a narrow staircase on the outside of the building, painted white with a hand-lettered sign at the bottom that said Kettering Law, established 1978, by appointment or by walking in, both welcome. I walked in. The office was small, just 2 rooms, a waiting area with 3 wooden chairs and a coffee pot, and a private office with a big oak desk and floor-to-ceiling bookshelves. The woman behind the desk looked up when I entered. She was 66 years old. She had white hair cut short and neat. She wore a soft gray cardigan over a white blouse and reading glasses on a chain around her neck. Her eyes were the sharpest blue I had ever seen, and when she looked at me, she went very, very still. "Oh," she said, softly, almost a whisper, "My Lord in heaven." I did not know what to say. I stood in her doorway holding my folder with Micah half hidden behind me. "You are Jonah's son," she said. It was not a question. "Yes, ma'am," I said. "I am Caleb. This is my brother Micah." Ruth Kettering stood up from her desk. She walked around it slowly, the way an older woman walks, when her knees are not what they used to be. She stopped in front of us, and she reached up and put a hand on my cheek. Her palm was soft and warm. "You have your father's eyes," she said, "and your grandfather's stubborn chin. Lord, I would know a Ridgeway boy anywhere." And then she started to cry. I had not expected that. I had prepared myself for a lot of things on that long drive from Chicago, but I had not prepared myself for a stranger to cry at the sight of my face. She invited us to sit down. She brought us coffee. She brought Micah a glass of orange juice and a plate of shortbread cookies from a tin she kept in her desk drawer. And then she folded her hands in her lap, and she began to tell us the truth about our family. "Your grandfather," she said, "was a farmer named Silas Ridgway. He was born on the land you now own. His father was born on that land. His father's father was born on that land. 4 generations of Ridgways have worked that farm, and every single one of them was a good man." She paused. She looked at Micah. She looked at me. "Silas passed away 6 months ago, in April. The same week your father did, though, neither of them ever knew. He had a stroke while he was feeding the chickens. Frank Voss found him in the barn the next morning. Micah made a small sound. I put my hand on his knee. Silas was 78 years old, Ruth continued. And I want you both to know something, because I need you to know this. Your grandfather never stopped looking for you. I opened my mouth to ask what she meant, but she held up a hand. Let me finish, she said, because this is going to hurt. But you deserve the truth. She stood up. She walked to a filing cabinet in the corner of her office. She unlocked the bottom drawer, and she pulled out a cardboard box, big, heavy. She carried it back to the desk and set it down in front of me. I want you to open this, Caleb, she said, in your own time, when you are ready. But I want you to know what is inside. I looked at the box. It was old, stained. There was a label on the side written in a shaky handwriting I had never seen before. 3 words. For my grandsons. My throat closed. Nothing came out. Your grandfather, Ruth said, wrote letters. He wrote hundreds of letters. He wrote to you on your birthdays. He wrote to you on Christmas. He wrote to you when he heard on the church prayer chain that Micah was sick. He wrote to you when your mother died. He wrote to you when your father remarried. Every single letter was returned, marked address unknown. But he kept writing them anyway. He would drop them off at the post office, and Marlene down at the post office would hold them for a few weeks, and then she would give them back to him because they always came back. And he would put them in that box, and he would write another one the next month, and the next month, and the next month. For 12 years, Caleb. Your grandfather wrote to you both for 12 years, and that woman your father married made sure not a single letter ever reached you. I sat very still, as if moving might break something. Micah was staring at the box. His face was pale. His hands were folded very tight in his lap, and I could see him trying so hard not to cry. I did not try. I let the tears come, silently, down my face, onto my jacket, because I finally understood. My father had not just been fooled by Delphine. My father had been isolated, piece by piece, person by person. She had cut him off from his own father. She had convinced him his own dad was, and Ruth used the exact word later, toxic. She had made sure 2 little boys grew up believing they were alone in the world. Because as long as we believed we were alone, we would never think to ask questions about a farm in Iowa. She had erased my grandfather, but she had not erased him fast enough. If you have ever lost someone before you got to meet them, and I mean truly lost them, a person who was blood, a person who was family, a person who should have been part of your life but was kept away, I need you to tell me in the comments. Just one word. Just tell me their name. I want to say it back to you. Because these people mattered. They mattered so much. And too often the world forgets them. Silas Ridgway. That was my grandfather's name. Say it with me, so he knows we remember. Ruth handed me the brass key, the one my father had left in the safety deposit box. The house is 3 miles out of town, she said. Take Route 7 north. When you see the mailbox that says Ridgway, turn right. The driveway is gravel. It winds through the corn for about half a mile, and then you will see it. She paused. Your grandfather wanted me to tell you something when you finally came. He made me memorize the exact words. He said, Ruth, when they come, and they will come, you tell them this. He said, you tell my boys that the farm has been waiting for them. You tell my boys that every single acre of that land belongs to them, and you tell my boys that if they ever need anything from this day until the day they die, this whole town is family. My throat closed again. Micah reached over and took my hand. His fingers were cold, but his grip was strong. Come on, Caleb, he whispered. Let's go home. The driveway was longer than I expected. The gravel crunched under the tires of the Honda Civic. Corn on both sides, tall and gold and rustling in the wind. Not the dead brown corn of a harvested field, but late-season corn, the kind that was ready to come down. The kind Silas Ridgway would have been getting ready to harvest if he had not died feeding the chickens 6 months earlier. And then the corn ended, and there it was. The farmhouse stood in the middle of a clearing, 2 stories tall, white clapboard siding peeling like sunburned skin, a porch that sagged on one side, a wraparound with a swing that had fallen off one chain. The roof needed work. 2 of the upstairs windows were boarded up, And behind the house I could see the outline of a red barn and a corn silo and a windmill turning slowly against the blue Iowa sky. I stopped the car. I turned off the engine. Micah did not move. He was staring through the windshield. His mouth was slightly open. His hands were pressed flat against the dashboard. "Caleb," he whispered, "is this ours?" I did not answer him, because I did not trust my voice. I opened the door. I stepped out. My boots crunched on the gravel. The air smelled like turned earth and dry corn husks and something else, something I could not name at first. And then I realized what it was. It smelled like the aftershave my father used to wear. I do not know how to explain it. I do not know if it was really there or if my mind put it there, because I needed it so badly. But standing in the driveway of my grandfather's farm on land my family had worked for 4 generations, I could smell my father. And I knew all the way down to my bones that I had come home. Micah got out of the car. He walked around to my side. He slipped his hand into mine the way he used to when he was 4 years old and scared of the dark. And together my little brother and I walked up the sagging porch steps of the farmhouse I had never known existed. I put the brass key into the lock. I turned it, and the door swung open. If you have ever walked into a place that was full of ghosts, but the good kind, the kind that hold you instead of hurt you, then you know what it felt like to walk into that farmhouse. The living room was covered in white sheets, furniture underneath waiting, a stone fireplace, wide plank wood floors dulled with dust. A grandfather clock in the corner stopped at 3:47. Photographs on the walls faded behind glass, and on the mantel in a silver frame a picture of a young woman with dark hair holding a baby. I walked over to it. I picked it up. The woman was my mother, Marigold, 23 years old, and the baby she was holding wrapped in a blue blanket was me. I had never seen this photograph, not once in my entire life, but my grandfather had it on his mantel. Micah came up beside me. He looked at the picture, and then he looked around the room, at the sheets over the furniture, at the dust in the sunlight, at the way the whole house seemed to have been waiting for someone to come back. "Caleb," he said, "look at this." He was pointing to something on the coffee table under the front window. There were 2 envelopes, sitting side by side. One had my name on it. One had Micah's. The handwriting was shaky, old, the same handwriting from the box in Ruth Kettering's office. Silas had left us letters, on the coffee table, just in case we ever came. Later I would learn that Hazel Brennan, an old neighbor woman who had been keeping the house clean for 8 months, had placed them there that very morning, the moment she saw the Honda Civic turn into the driveway. She had been carrying those 2 envelopes in her cardigan pocket for 8 months, waiting. I picked up mine. My hands were shaking, and I was about to open it, when I heard a sound behind me. A sound that did not belong, the sound of a floorboard creaking in the hallway, the sound of someone else in the house. I froze. Micah froze. We looked at each other. The house had been locked when we arrived. I had used the brass key myself. There was no other car in the driveway. There should not have been anyone else in this house, but there was. I put my hand on Micah's shoulder. I pushed him gently behind me. I picked up an old iron fireplace poker from the hearth, and I started walking toward the hallway. The floorboards creaked under my boots. Every step sounded like a gunshot. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my teeth. The hallway was dark, the shades all drawn. I could just barely see the doorway to the kitchen at the far end. And on the floor, cutting through the dust, were footprints. Not mine, not Micah's. Someone else's. Fresh. Recent. I turned to Micah. I put a finger to my lips. He shook his head. He mouthed one word. No, he would not leave me. Together we crept down the hallway, toward the kitchen, toward whoever was in this house with us. And that was when the door at the far end of the kitchen creaked open, and a shadow moved into the light. I raised the fireplace poker. The shadow in the kitchen doorway did not move for a long moment, and then it stepped forward. It was a woman. She was in her 70s, tall, thin, wearing a blue house dress and a cardigan the color of dried lavender. Her hair was silver, pulled back in a neat bun. She was holding a broom in one hand and a bucket of soapy water in the other. And when she saw us standing in the hallway, my brother behind me holding a fireplace poker like a sword, her mouth fell open in surprise. "Oh, my stars," she said. "Oh, my dear Lord in heaven, You came. I did not lower the poker right away. My hands were shaking too badly. The woman set down her bucket, slowly, carefully, like a person approaching a frightened animal. She put her hand over her heart, and she started to cry. I am so sorry, she said. I did not mean to scare you. My name is Hazel, Hazel Brennan. My husband Orville and I, we live down the road. We have been coming over every week for 8 months, to sweep, to dust, to keep the mice out. Silas asked us to, before he passed. He said, Hazel, if my grandsons ever come home, I want the house to be ready for them. I do not want them walking into a mess. She wiped her eyes with the corner of her cardigan. I saw the car in the driveway, she said. I thought maybe it was that lawyer from Chicago again. Fairbanks. He came sniffing around here last month with some fella in a suit. I chased them off with the broom. I lowered the poker. I felt Micah exhale behind me. Hazel Brennan looked at us, really looked at us, and her face crumpled all over again. You must be Jonah's boys, she whispered. Oh, look at you. The older one, you must be Caleb. And you, sweetheart, you must be Micah. Come here. Come here right now. She opened her arms, and I do not know what happened to me in that moment. I do not know why my knees almost gave out. I do not know why my little brother let go of my hand and walked past me and let a stranger wrap her arms around him for the first time in 6 months. But he did, and she held him, and she rocked him back and forth in the dusty hallway of my grandfather's farmhouse, and she whispered against his hair, You made it, sweetheart. You made it home. Hazel called her husband Orville from the kitchen phone. It was one of those old rotary phones mounted to the wall, and she had to dial the number with her finger slowly, 1 digit at a time. She told him to come over, right now. Bring the truck. Bring the good casserole from the freezer. The boys had arrived. 20 minutes later, an old blue Ford pickup pulled up the driveway. Orville Brennan climbed out. He was 74 years old. He wore a green John Deere cap and jeans that were faded almost to white. His hands were the biggest hands I had ever seen on a man. Farmer's hands. Rough and cracked and strong. He looked at me. He looked at Micah. And he said one thing. You boys hungry? I nodded. My eyes stung. I looked down at the kitchen floor so he would not see. He walked into the kitchen carrying a green Pyrex dish covered in tinfoil. He set it on the counter. He turned on the old gas stove with a click and a puff of blue flame. And while Hazel found plates in the cupboard and washed them in the sink, Orville stood at the counter and looked at me. Son, he said, your grandpa was my best friend for 41 years. He talked about you two every single Sunday at church. Every single one. Half the congregation of the Cedar Hollow Methodist Church knows your names by heart. So you are not strangers here. You understand me? You are not strangers. Micah answered for both of us. He said, Thank you, sir. And Orville Brennan, 74 years old farmer, for 55 of those years, took off his John Deere cap and pressed it to his chest. Sir, he said quietly, my father was a sir. I am just Orville, and you two are family. I need to stop here for a moment, because I know some of you watching this are crying right now. I can feel you. I know because I am crying too, just remembering it. If you have ever been welcomed by a stranger the way we were welcomed by Orville and Hazel Brennan, I want you to tell me about it in the comments. The name of the person, the moment they made you feel like you belonged. Because there are so many good people in this country, and they do not get talked about enough. Now stay with me, because the story is about to get harder. The next morning, as promised, Orville and Hazel came back. But they brought company. A pickup truck rattled up the driveway. A tall, quiet man in his 40s climbed out. Frank Voss from the feed store on Main Street. And behind him, climbing down from the passenger seat with a cardboard box in her arms, was a 17-year-old girl with a long brown ponytail and green eyes. This is my daughter, Sadie, Frank said. She wanted to come. Sadie set the box down on the porch. She looked at Micah. She did not look at him with pity the way most people had looked at him since our father died. She looked at him like he was just a boy, just another kid in Cedar Hollow. I brought you some books, she said. I heard you like to read. These were mine. I already finished them. Micah looked in the box. Charlotte's Web, The Little Prince, Bridge to Terabithia, old paperbacks worn at the corners loved. He looked up at Sadie. Thank you, he whispered. You are welcome, she said. Come by the feed store sometime. I work Saturdays. We have kittens in the back. And she smiled at him. And Micah for a moment smiled back. It was the first time I had seen him smile at anyone but me in 6 months. That afternoon, after everyone had left and the sun was starting to go down, Micah went into the room that had been my grandfather's study and started looking at the books on the shelves. Old books, farming manuals, a Bible with a cracked leather cover, a photo album with black paper pages. I stayed in the living room. I picked up the letter with my name on it. I sat down in my grandfather's rocking chair, and I opened it. "My dear Caleb," it began, "if you are reading this, then I am gone, and I have to accept that I never got to hold you, not once in 18 years. That is my great sorrow. It is the one I take with me. But I want you to know something, grandson. I never stopped trying, not for one day, not for 1 hour. There are 582 letters in a box in Ruth Kettering's office. Every single one came back. Address unknown. But I want you to know I wrote them anyway, because you were mine, and Micah was mine, and loving you did not require permission from anyone. I want you to know that this land is yours. Every fence post, every acre, every stone in the driveway. Your great-great-grandfather Elijah Ridgway broke this soil with a mule and a plow in 1876. 4 generations of Ridgway men have gotten up before the sun to work this ground. And now it is yours. Not because you earned it, because you were born. There is more, Caleb. There is much more. But I do not think a letter is the right place for it. If you ever come here, and I am praying you do, you will find what you need. Your father knew. He was a good man, a good boy once, and I loved him so much. Do not blame him for what happened. He was fighting a battle he did not know he was in. Look up, Caleb. That is what I used to tell him when he was little and scared. Look up. There is always more sky than you think. I love you, grandson. I have always loved you, and I always will. Grandpa Silas. I read the letter twice, and then I sat in that rocking chair alone in a farmhouse that was suddenly mine, and I let myself grieve for a man I had never met. That night, after Micah fell asleep in the upstairs bedroom that had once been my father's, I could not stop thinking about my father's words. Look up. I got out of bed. I put on my flannel shirt. I took the old flashlight from the kitchen drawer, and I walked through the dark house one room at a time, looking up. I checked the living room, the kitchen, the dining room, the study. Nothing. I climbed the stairs. I checked the hallway ceiling. Nothing. I walked into the master bedroom, my grandfather's bedroom. The bed was made up neatly, a quilt folded at the foot the way Hazel had left it. There was a walk-in closet against the far wall. I walked into the closet, and I turned the flashlight up. And there it was. One of the ceiling tiles was slightly out of line, just barely. You would not have seen it if you were not looking. There was a strip of masking tape along the edge, and on the tape in my grandfather's shaky handwriting was one word. Here. My hands started shaking. I climbed up on the little built-in shelf inside the closet. I reached up. I pushed the tile. It slid to the side easily, and a metal drop-down ladder came sliding down out of the ceiling with a soft, mechanical click. An attic. There was an attic in the farmhouse, and nobody had told me about it. Not Ruth, not Hazel, not Orville, because nobody knew. I climbed the ladder. The attic was long. It ran the whole length of the house. Bare plywood floor, a single bulb on a pull chain. I pulled it. Yellow light flooded the space. And at the far end of the attic, bolted directly into the load-bearing beams of the house, was the biggest safe I had ever seen in my life. 6 feet tall, brushed steel, thick as a bank vault. It looked like it belonged in a downtown Chicago office building, not in the attic of an Iowa farmhouse. And the digital keypad on the front had been smashed. Someone had taken a hammer to it, recently, within the last few weeks. The plastic housing was cracked, wires were hanging out, there were scratches on the steel like someone had tried to pry it open with a crowbar. Somebody had already found this safe, and they had failed to open it. My heart sank so hard I felt sick. But then I noticed something. Taped to the side of the smashed keypad, a small yellow, sticky note, in my grandfather's handwriting. Caleb, if the keypad is broken, look behind the panel. The key from your father is what you need. My knees went soft. Grandpa Silas had known this would happen. He had known someone would try to break into the safe, and he had left me a second way in. I pulled out my pocket knife. I wedged the blade behind the smashed plastic housing. I pried. The whole panel popped off, and underneath, flush against the steel of the safe, was a small, round mechanical keyhole. I reached into my pocket. I pulled out the silver key from the bank in Chicago, the one my father had left me. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped it. I slid the silver key into the mechanical lock. I turned it, and I heard deep inside that steel vault a heavy, satisfying mechanical thud. I grabbed the wheel on the front of the safe. I braced my boots against the floor, and I pulled. The door swung open. I need to stop here again, because I know your heart is pounding right now. Mine was pounding too. I could hardly stand. If you are with me right now, watching this, listening to this, holding your phone in your hand, or your remote control in your lap, I want you to do me a favor. Take a breath. Put your hand on your chest. Feel your heartbeat. Because we made it this far, my brother and I, and you are here with us, and I am so grateful for that. Now let me show you what was inside my grandfather's safe. The first thing I saw was money. Not stacks of cash, not the way you see in movies, just an envelope, a thick manila envelope. And when I opened it and counted, there was $47,000 inside. Cash, in 50s and hundreds. $47,000. A lifetime of saving. From a farmer who never took a vacation, who never bought a new truck, who wore the same John Deere cap for 20 years. $47,000 tucked into a manila envelope in an attic safe waiting for two grandsons he had never met. The second thing was a small velvet pouch. I opened it. Inside were pieces of jewelry. Old, beautiful, a gold wedding band, a cameo brooch, a pair of pearl earrings, a locket. I opened the locket. Inside was a tiny photograph of a young woman with dark hair. My mother, Marigold, when she was maybe 20 years old, smiling. My grandfather had a locket with a picture of my mother inside. My father's second wife had thrown out every photograph of my mother in our house. But my grandfather had kept this locket safe for me for 18 years. The third thing was a stack of letters, bound with brown twine, hundreds of letters, all addressed to me and Micah at various addresses in Naperville, in Wheaton, and Chicago. Every single one stamped in red ink. Return to sender, address unknown. 582 letters, just as Ruth had said. I picked up the one on top. It was dated 3 months before he died. It began, "My dear boys, it is spring here on the farm. The lilacs are blooming. I wonder if you have ever smelled lilacs in April. I hope you have. I hope somewhere in that big city of yours, there is a spring and it comes to you the way it used to come to me." I could not read anymore. I set the letters aside. The fourth thing was my father's journal. Leather-bound, 6 months of entries, the last 6 months of his life. I did not open it yet, not that night. And the fifth thing was a manila envelope, sealed with red wax. On the front, in my father's handwriting, was one word: truth. I opened it. Inside were 3 documents. And what I read that night changed everything I thought I knew about my family, about my father's death, about the woman who had thrown my brother and me out of the only home we had ever known. The first document was a will, my father's real will, dated 5 days before he died. It was witnessed by 2 people I did not know. It was notarized by a notary in downtown Chicago, and in it my father left everything he owned to me and my brother. The house in Naperville, his retirement account, his life insurance policy, every single dollar, to be held in trust for us until I turned 21. The will Delphine had presented to the court, the one dated 3 weeks before his death, was a fake. The second document was a report from a private laboratory in Switzerland, toxicology results, analyzing samples of my father's heart medication pills. The pills Delphine had been giving him for 6 months before he died. Every single pill was fake. Not poisoned, not laced with anything illegal, just fake. Sugar and herbs, a cheap imitation of the real medication, made in some overseas facility, sold on the internet. My father had a heart murmur, a real one, that had been managed for 7 years by real medication. And for the last 6 months of his life, Delphine had been swapping his real pills for placebos. She had not poisoned him. She had done something almost worse. She had let him die of a heart condition she knew he had by taking away the medicine that was keeping him alive. And she had done it slowly enough that by the time he died, nobody would question it. He had a heart condition, everyone would say. He was under a lot of stress. It just happened. The third document was a stack of printed emails between Delphine Ashcroft and Winston Fairbanks, planning it all, for 6 years. I sat on the plywood floor of my grandfather's attic in the middle of the night in a farmhouse in Iowa, and I read those emails until the sun came up. Winston Fairbanks was not my father's college roommate the way I had been told my whole life. Winston Fairbanks was Delphine Ashcroft's distant cousin. They had grown up together in Michigan. And 6 years earlier, at a real estate expo in Chicago, Delphine had walked into my father's life on purpose. Because Winston, who had been my father's friend for 2 years by then, had told her that Jonah Ridgway was a widower with 2 boys and a comfortable retirement fund and a heart condition that could, given the right circumstances, prove fatal. They had planned everything, every dinner, every date, every gift she had bought him, every conversation she had steered him into, every friend of his she had convinced him to cut off, every family member she had told him was toxic, including Grandpa Silas. The emails talked about the farm. They knew Silas had a farm somewhere in Iowa. They did not know where. They had spent years trying to find it, because if there was land, there was value, and if there was value, they wanted it. And the last email, dated 2 weeks before my father died, was the one that broke me. Winston had written to Delphine, "Once Jonah is gone, the boys will be dealt with easily. The older one will be 18 in a few months. He can be pushed out on his own. The younger one goes to state care. From there, we work on locating the Iowa property. If we can find it, that is our real prize. The Naperville house is nice, but the land could be worth $2.4 million to the right agricultural buyer." The state care line. He had written that about my brother, my 15-year-old brother with asthma, casually, like Micah was a piece of furniture to be moved. I stared at that line for a long time, and then very quietly alone in the attic, I stopped being 18 years old. Somewhere between reading that final email and setting it down on the plywood floor, I stopped being a boy, and I became something else. A brother, a grandson, a Ridgway. Delphine Ashcroft and Winston Fairbanks were not going to get away with any of this. Not $1, not 1 acre, not one more day of freedom. I did not yet know how, but I knew who would help me, and I knew where to start. I put everything back in the safe, except for the will, the toxicology report, and the emails. Those I took with me. I closed the safe. I climbed down the attic ladder. I slid the ceiling tile back into place. I went to my father's old bedroom. Micah was still asleep. His breathing was even and quiet. The asthma had been better since we crossed into Iowa. I did not know if it was the air, or the peace, or the sleep, or all three. But my brother was breathing easier than he had breathed in months. I did not wake him. I went downstairs. I sat at the kitchen table, and I waited for the sun to come up. It came up over the cornfields at 6:42 in the morning, pink and gold and slow. And I sat there watching it, drinking coffee from a mug that had my grandfather's initials on it, SR, and I felt something I had never felt in my whole life. I felt like I knew who I was. I was Caleb Ridgway, son of Jonah, grandson of Silas, great-grandson of Elijah, who had broken this soil with a mule in 1876. I was a Ridgway, and I was on Ridgway land, and no woman in a cashmere robe from a suburb of Chicago was ever going to take that away from me. I picked up the kitchen phone. I dialed Ruth Kettering's office. She answered on the second ring, even though it was not yet 7 in the morning. "Ruth," I said, "I found something. I need your help. And I think I need to call the FBI." She was quiet for a moment, and then she said the words I will never forget. "Caleb, honey, I have been waiting 8 months for a Ridgway boy to say those exact words to me. Come on over. I will put on a fresh pot." I met with Ruth at 8 o'clock that morning. I brought the documents. I spread them out on her desk. She read them slowly. Her hands trembled. When she finished, she took off her reading glasses and she pinched the bridge of her nose, and she was silent for a long time. Then she picked up her phone and she made a call. "I want to introduce you to someone," she said to me. "Her name is Margaret Chen. She is a special agent with the FBI Financial Crimes Division Chicago field office. She and I were roommates at Northwestern Law School 40 years ago. She is one of the finest human beings I have ever known, and she is going to want to see what you brought me." She dialed the number. She waited. And then she said, "Maggie, it is Ruth. I need you to come to Cedar Hollow. Today. Bring your team. I have a case for you that is going to make your career. And I have a young man here who needs your help." She hung up. She looked at me across the desk. Her blue eyes were sharp again. Sharp and clear and old and very, very kind. "We are going to make this right, Caleb," she said. "It may take some time, but we are going to make it right." I nodded. She reached across the desk and put her hand over mine. "Your grandfather would be so proud of you," she said. "So proud. And I want you to know something. From this day forward until the day I die, this office is yours. Anytime you need anything. Anytime. You just walk up those stairs, and I will be here." Agent Margaret Chen arrived in Cedar Hollow at 3 that afternoon. She was in her early 60s, small, compact, iron gray hair cut short. She wore a dark blue suit and had a badge on her belt and a gun in a holster under her jacket. And when she walked into Ruth's office, she looked at me the way a doctor looks at a patient, carefully, assessing. She read the documents. She asked me questions, sharp, precise questions, about my father, about Delphine, about Winston, about the safe, about the letters, about the toxicology report from Switzerland, about who else knew we were in Iowa. And then at 5 o'clock in the afternoon, she made a decision. "Caleb," she said, "I need you and your brother to stay here in Cedar Hollow. Do not go back to Illinois. Do not call anyone in Illinois. Do not use any credit cards or ID that could be tracked. As of this moment, you are under the informal protection of the FBI. We are going to open a full investigation. But I have to be honest with you. This is going to take months, maybe a year, and it is going to be ugly." I looked at her, and I asked the only question that mattered. "Can we win?" She smiled. Just a little. Just at the corner of her mouth. "Son," she said, "with what you have brought me, we are not going to win. We are going to bury them." But before that could happen, they came for us one more time. Because Winston Fairbanks was not stupid. And when I did not show up in Chicago to sign the paperwork Delphine had forged, when I did not respond to the letters they had sent to the Naperville address, when weeks went by and I did not surface, they figured out where I must be. And on a Tuesday night in early November, 10 days after Agent Chen arrived in Cedar Hollow, a black SUV pulled into the driveway of the farmhouse. Micah and I were in the kitchen. I was making him a grilled cheese sandwich. He was reading Charlotte's Web at the kitchen table, the copy Sadie Voss had given him. The dogs barked first. Orville and Hazel's 2 farm dogs who had adopted us as their own. They started up from the front porch where they had been napping, and they ran barking down the driveway. I looked out the kitchen window. 2 men were getting out of a black SUV. One was Winston Fairbanks. The other was a big man in a dark coat I did not recognize. A private investigator, most likely. Somebody Winston had hired. My heart started pounding. I looked at Micah. He had gone very still at the table. He had heard the dogs, too. He knew something was wrong. I picked up the kitchen phone. I dialed the number Agent Chen had made me memorize. She picked up on the second ring. "Winston is here," I whispered. 2 of them, at the house, right now. Agent Chen's voice was calm, perfectly terrifyingly calm. "Get your brother out the back. Go to the barn. Stay low. My team is 15 minutes out. Do not engage. Do you understand me, Caleb? Do not engage." "Yes, ma'am." I hung up. I grabbed Micah's hand. I grabbed his inhaler off the counter, and I pulled him toward the back door of the kitchen, out onto the porch, down the steps across the yard, and into the corn. The corn was tall, higher than my head. Micah and I ran through the rows, ducking, breathing hard. Behind us I could hear Winston shouting. He was pounding on the front door. He was calling my name. "Caleb," he was yelling. "Come out. Let's talk." There is no reason for this to be difficult. I did not stop. I kept running. Micah was wheezing. I could hear it. I could feel his little hand gripping mine so hard it hurt. We reached the barn. I pulled him inside. I closed the big wooden door as quietly as I could, and we crouched down behind an old tractor that had not run in 20 years. I put my finger to my lips. Micah nodded. His eyes were huge. Tears were streaming down his face, but he was silent. He was so silent. My brave, quiet, brilliant little brother. I gave him the inhaler. He took 2 puffs. Outside, I could hear Winston still yelling, and then I heard something else. Sirens. Distant at first, then closer, then very close. Agent Chen's team had made it in less than 15 minutes. She had lied to me, because they had already been on the way. I heard tires, I heard voices, I heard Winston stop yelling, and then I heard the words I had been waiting 6 months to hear. FBI, get on the ground, now. They arrested Winston Fairbanks in my grandfather's driveway that night. He did not resist. He tried to run for the SUV. He got about 10 feet before a young agent tackled him into the gravel. The big man he had brought with him surrendered without a fight. He was, it turned out, an unlicensed private investigator from Cicero with 2 prior arrests. Not a professional. Just a guy Winston had paid $3,000 in cash to help him find me and my brother. Simultaneously, 300 miles to the east in the suburb of Naperville, Illinois, a second FBI team was knocking on the front door of the house I had grown up in. Delphine Ashcroft was, according to the report I read later, in her cashmere robe when they arrested her. She had been drinking a glass of white wine. She had just finished watching an episode of a home renovation show. She did not scream when they put the handcuffs on her. She just laughed. She actually laughed, the agent told me later, like it was the punchline to a joke she had been waiting years to hear. Preston was there too. He was arrested as an accessory. He had known about the fake pills. He had known about the fake will. He had helped Delphine forge the guardianship documents for Micah. He was 22 years old, and he had done all of it for money. But when the agents put the cuffs on him, Preston Ashcroft broke down and cried. And within 72 hours, he had signed a full cooperation agreement. He gave up everything, every detail, every conversation, every document, every one of his mother's contacts, in exchange for a reduced sentence and witness protection after the trial. He was the reason Delphine got 25 years in federal prison when it was all over. He was the reason Winston Fairbanks got 30. And he was the reason a chain of similar schemes stretching back 9 years across 3 states in the Midwest was finally uncovered. I want to stop the story for a minute, because I know some of you watching are shaking your heads right now. You are saying, how does this happen? How does a woman like this get away with something like this in America? How does a lawyer help her? How do so many people miss it? And I do not have a good answer, except this. Evil, when it wears a nice cashmere robe and drives a Lexus, is very hard to see, especially when it smiles at your children, especially when it brings casseroles to church potlucks, especially when it convinces a lonely widower that he has finally found love again. The only thing that stops it in the end is a father who realizes what is happening in time to hide the truth, and a grandfather who never stopped writing letters, and a small-town lawyer who kept a promise, and an FBI agent who took a phone call from an old law school roommate, and a 15-year-old boy with asthma who was brave enough to run into a cornfield in the dark, and an 18-year-old brother who refused at any cost to leave him behind. That is what stopped Delphine Ashcroft. Love stopped her. Not weapons, not luck. Love. My father's love hidden in a fishing tackle box. My grandfather's love sealed in a safe in an attic. My little brother's love gripping my hand in a cornfield at night. And an old lawyer's love kept alive for 40 years since her law school days. Have you ever had someone in your life whose love reached you across time? A grandmother whose letters you found years later? A father whose voice you can still hear when you close your eyes? A husband whose hand you can feel on your shoulder even now? Tell me about them in the comments, because they are still here. As long as we say their names, they are still here. The trial took 4 months. It was held in the federal courthouse in downtown Chicago. Micah and I drove up from Cedar Hollow every week. Ruth Kettering came with us. So did Orville and Hazel Brennan. So did Frank Voss from the feed store, whose daughter Sadie had become Micah's best friend during those long autumn weeks on the farm. So did Pastor Abernathy from the Cedar Hollow Methodist Church, who had baptized my father in 1972, and who had promised my grandfather he would see his grandsons through whatever came next. And in the back row, quietly unnoticed by most people, sat a 68-year-old woman named Millie Fortenberry, who had closed her diner in Aurora for the day and driven 3 hours by herself to be there. because 8 months earlier she had fed a hungry boy in her diner without asking questions. And she wanted to see how the story ended. We were not alone. Not for one single day of that trial. Delphine's defense attorney was expensive. He was slick. He tried to paint her as a grieving widow who had been manipulated by Winston Fairbanks. He tried to argue she had never known the pills were fake. He tried to suggest my father's death was natural, that the toxicology report was flawed, that the whole thing was a misunderstanding. The prosecutor destroyed him. She was a woman in her 50s named Denise Halloran. She had short red hair and the sharpest voice I have ever heard in a courtroom. She spoke slowly. She never raised her voice. And she walked the jury through every single email, every single lab result, every single forged document, every single one of Grandpa Silas's return letters, until there was not a single juror who could look at Delphine Ashcroft without seeing what she really was. The nurse who had helped switch my father's pills confessed on the third day of trial. Her name was Beverly. She was a private duty nurse Delphine had hired to care for my father in the last 2 months of his life. She had been paid $12,000 in cash to swap real medication for fake. And she wept on the witness stand as she told the jury how she had done it. How my father had thanked her every morning for helping him. How he had once, near the end, when he was foggy and confused, called her his angel. She looked at me from the witness stand. She said, "I am so sorry, young man. I am so sorry." I did not know he had sons. I did not answer her. But Micah, sitting next to me, whispered under his breath, "It's okay, ma'am. Dad would forgive you." I do not know if he really did. I do not know if I did. But Micah said it. And I think he needed to say it so he could stop carrying it. The biggest revelation of the trial came on the 58th day. It was Denise Halloran who found it. Her investigators, digging through Winston Fairbanks' financial records for the case, had traced payments back 9 years. Payments Winston had made to Delphine, small ones, over the course of 5 years before she ever met my father. Wire transfers, envelopes of cash, 23 payments in total. And when they cross-referenced Winston's other clients from that same period, they found 2 other cases, in Indianapolis, Indiana, and in Green Bay, Wisconsin, 2 other widowers, both with heart conditions, both with children, both dead within a year of marrying women Winston Fairbanks had introduced to them at real estate expos. Both of those women had different names, different backgrounds, different faces. But they were both Delphine. She had done it before, twice, under different aliases, in different states. Winston had been running the operation for almost a decade, finding the men, introducing them to Delphine, waiting, collecting. And when Denise Halloran laid all of it out in open court on the 58th day of trial, Delphine Ashcroft finally stopped smiling. She looked at me across the courtroom, for the first time since October, and I saw in her cold gray eyes something I had never seen in them before. She looked afraid. On the 71st day of trial, I took the witness stand. I was 19 years old by then. I had turned 19 in a courtroom hallway in January, eating a cupcake Hazel had brought in a Tupperware container. Ruth had made me practice my testimony for weeks, but nothing prepared me for what it was like to sit in that box 10 feet from the woman who had killed my father and to tell the truth. I told them about the porch that October morning, the rain, the garbage bag, my brother's blue lips, the click of the deadbolt. I told them about the Honda Civic, the Walmart parking lot, Millie's diner, the phone call Micah remembered, the tackle box with the false bottom. I told them about Cedar Hollow, about Ruth, about the letters my grandfather had written for 12 years to grandsons who never received a single one. And then Denise Halloran asked me the last question. "Mr. Ridgway," she said, "what did your father say to you in the letter he left in the tackle box about your grandfather?" I looked at the letter entered into evidence projected on the courtroom screen. I read the words out loud in a voice I could barely control. He said, "You and Micah have a grandfather." My father. His name is Silas Ridgway. He lives on a farm in Iowa. Delphine convinced me to cut him out of our lives. I was wrong. I was so wrong. I looked at Delphine Ashcroft. She looked back at me. Her mouth was a thin, flat line. Her cashmere was gone now. She was in a jumpsuit the color of dead grass. Her hair had gone gray at the roots. She looked for the first time since I had known her like an ordinary woman. Tired, cornered, old. I did not hate her in that moment. I did not have room for hate. I only had room for one thought. You lost. I said it in my head. You lost. You spent 6 years planning this, and you lost. Because a farmer in Iowa loved his grandsons more than you loved money. Then I got down from the witness stand, and I walked back to my seat next to my brother, and Micah squeezed my hand so hard it hurt. The verdict came down on a Friday afternoon in mid-March. Delphine Ashcroft was found guilty on 22 counts: wire fraud, forgery, conspiracy to commit fraud, elder abuse, manslaughter, 3 counts of prescription fraud, 2 counts of interstate racketeering. She was sentenced to 25 years in federal prison without possibility of parole for the first 15. Winston Fairbanks was found guilty on 31 counts. Everything Delphine got, plus the additional charges related to the Indiana and Wisconsin cases. He was sentenced to 30 years. Preston Ashcroft, in exchange for his cooperation, was sentenced to 5 years of federal probation, 500 hours of community service, and a lifetime ban on any inheritance from any of the estates involved. He walked out of the courtroom that day, and I never saw him again. I heard later that he moved to Arizona and started working at a Home Depot. I hope wherever he is that he sleeps at night. I hope he thinks about my father. I hope he thinks about my brother. I hope he does better with the years he has left than the ones he wasted. My father's real will was validated. The forged will was thrown out. The house in Naperville was ours. The retirement account was ours. The life insurance policy was ours. All of it held in trust for me and Micah until I turned 21. I stood in the courtroom after the verdict. Micah was next to me. Ruth Kettering had one hand on my shoulder. Agent Margaret Chen was standing behind us. Orville and Hazel Brennan were in the front row of the gallery. Frank Voss was next to them. Sadie was next to Frank. Pastor Abernathy was next to Sadie. Millie Fortenberry was there too, 3 rows back, dabbing her eyes with a paper napkin from her purse. And behind them, filling the entire back half of the courtroom, were 37 people from Cedar Hollow, Iowa, who had driven 6 hours in a chartered bus to see it through with us. They had come, every one of them, because Silas Ridgway had asked them to, 8 months earlier, from his hospital bed. He had said, if my boys ever come home, this town looks after them. And they had, 6 months later. It was July. High summer in Iowa. The corn was chest high and green. The air smelled like sweet grass and thunderstorms. Micah was 16 now. He had grown 2 inches since the trial. His asthma had almost entirely disappeared. The doctors said it was the air. Ruth said it was Iowa itself. Hazel said it was because he was finally where he belonged. I was 19. I had enrolled at Iowa State University in agricultural sciences. I drove up to Ames twice a week for classes. The rest of the time, I worked the farm with Orville and Frank and a young farmhand named Cal Whitmore, who had grown up 2 farms over and who had asked to help me get the land back into production. We had planted our first crop that spring, 140 acres of soybeans, 40 acres of sweet corn. It was a small start, but it was a start. And every morning when I woke up and looked out my bedroom window and saw the fields, I thought about my grandfather and my father, and every Ridgway man before them who had done exactly the same thing. The farmhouse had been repainted, white again, but brighter now, sharper. Ruth's grandson Toby had helped me redo the roof over spring break. Orville had rebuilt the porch swing. Hazel had made new curtains for the kitchen. The house was still old. It would always be old, but it was ours. We had used the $47,000 from the safe carefully, some for the roof, some for a used John Deere tractor, some for Micah's medical bills, and some for something my grandfather would have wanted more than anything else. We started a foundation. We called it the Silas Ridgway Fund for Rural Children with Lung Disease. Micah picked the name. He picked it because he wanted every kid like him growing up in a small town to know they were not alone, to know somebody in the world was paying attention, to know their little brothers and sisters had a chance. Ruth Kettering set up the paperwork. Frank Voss donated the first $100. Orville donated the second. Within 6 months, we had raised $19,000 from Cedar Hollow alone. By the end of the first year, we would raise almost $200,000 from all across Iowa. We would give it away, every dollar, to families who needed inhalers, to families who could not afford specialists, to little brothers who woke up in the middle of the night gasping for breath, wondering if anyone cared. I want to stop here one more time because I know some of you have been carrying stories like this for years. Little brothers, little sisters, sick children, grandchildren far away. I know you understand what it is to lie awake at night worrying about someone you love who cannot fight for themselves. If that is you right now, I want you to know something. You are not alone. There are people out here doing the work. There are grandfathers writing letters that never get delivered, but that still matter. There are big brothers who will run into cornfields in the dark. There are small-town lawyers keeping promises, and there is a whole country of good ordinary people who will show up for a stranger's grandsons if given half a chance. Do not give up on that country. Do not give up on those people. They are still out there, I promise you. There was one last thing. One evening in late July, a package arrived in the mail. It was addressed to me. There was no return address, just a postmark from Cedar Hollow. I opened it on the front porch. Micah was sitting on the swing beside me reading Charlotte's Web for the fourth time. The sun was setting behind the barn. Fireflies were starting to come up out of the corn. Inside the package was a shoebox, and inside the shoebox was a hand-knit sweater, blue and white, small enough for a 6-year-old boy, and a copy of a children's book called The Little Prince, and a photograph, old, slightly water-damaged, of a man in his 60s standing next to a boy who could have been my twin in overalls, holding up a fish beside a farm pond I did not recognize. There was a note pinned to the sweater, in Hazel Brennan's handwriting. Caleb, honey, I found this in the back of my closet last week. Your grandpa gave it to me 8 years ago and asked me to hold on to it in case one day he never got to give it to you. He knitted the sweater himself. He was a terrible knitter, but he tried and tried. He said he wanted his oldest grandson to have something he made with his own hands. The book was your dad's when he was little. Your grandpa saved it. The photograph is your father and your grandfather at the pond on the North 40. Your dad was 8 years old. I hope you know how much you were loved. Even when you did not know it. Even when no one told you. Even across all those years, you were loved. Love, Hazel. Micah put down his book. He came over and sat next to me. He looked at the sweater. He looked at the book. He looked at the photograph of our father as a little boy standing next to the grandfather we had never known. And then very quietly, my little brother did something I had not seen him do since the day our father died. He smiled. A real smile. Not the sad smile he had worn for months. Not the polite smile he gave strangers, but a real, full, honest smile. The smile of a boy who had finally realized he was safe. Caleb, he whispered. Look at Dad. He looks so happy. I looked. My father at 8 years old in overalls, 2 sizes too big, holding up a bluegill fish and grinning at his own father. In a place I had never seen, on land that now belonged to me and my brother. And I understood for the first time that my father had not been an orphan. He had not been alone in the world. He had been a son, and he had been loved. And he had been happy once before Delphine, before the city, before all the years of quiet suffering that had led to that April afternoon on the living room couch. My father had grown up here, on this farm, in this house, under this sky, and now his sons had come home to it. I looked out over the fields. The corn was catching the last of the pink light. The windmill was turning slowly. A red-winged blackbird was calling from a fence post. And somewhere out there, maybe on a wooden dock beside a farm pond on the North 40, I could almost see my father and grandfather standing together, watching us, nodding. Micah leaned his head against my shoulder. Caleb, he said, I think we did it. I know, buddy, I said. I know we did. We sat there on the porch for a long time, long after the sun went down, long after the stars came out. Ruth's cat came up out of the corn and jumped up on the porch swing and curled up in Micah's lap. An owl started calling from the barn. Somewhere down the road at the Brennan farm, a light came on in the kitchen window. And I thought about that October morning in Naperville, standing on the porch in the rain, holding a black garbage bag, watching my stepmother close the mahogany door and turn off the light. She thought she had broken us. She had no idea what she had actually done. She had sent us home. If you have watched this story all the way through to the end, thank you. From the bottom of my heart, thank you. I know some of you cried. I know some of you thought about your own families. I know some of you are sitting in your living rooms right now at the end of a long day, wondering if anyone out there understands what your life has been like. I want you to know that I understand. My brother understands. And the whole town of Cedar Hollow, Iowa would understand too if you ever walked into Millie's Diner and told them your story. If this story meant something to you, would you do me one favor? Subscribe to this channel. Not for me, for the next person who needs to hear a story like this. Because there is somebody out there tonight sitting alone thinking they have nothing left. And your subscription helps this story reach them. And leave a comment. Tell me the name of somebody who loved you across time. A grandmother, a father, an old friend, somebody whose love reached you when you needed it most. I read every single comment, every one. And come back next week, because I have another story to tell you about a young woman named Wren Hollister who was released from a Montana state hospital at 22 years old with nothing but a paper bag of her belongings, and who received a phone call 3 weeks later from a lawyer in a small town called Silver Creek, telling her that her grandmother had left her a ranch she had never been told existed, in a place she had never been, with a secret waiting in the loft of the barn. I will tell you her story next. Until then, be kind to somebody today, even a stranger, especially a stranger. You never know whose grandson you might be. I am Caleb Ridgway, and this is where I belong. Good night, everybody. Good night from Cedar Hollow, Iowa. And Grandpa Silas, if you can hear us, wherever you are, we made it home.